There's just something special about Fortnite LTMs, and even though Epic doesn't do them as much anymore, today I'm ranking every single LTM from the very worst to the very best, and there have been 74 in total. And at number 74 in last place, it's got to be the Love Shot LTM. This was the Valentine's Day LTM based on the One Shot LTM, which was actually very popular. The only weapon though was the Cupid's crossbow, and most people were just skybasing because the crossbow did only 1 damage to builds. And yeah, the crossbow just wasn't really fun or good to use, so it was a very frustrating item, and that being the only gun you could use plus the skybases made this LTM the worst of all time. And by the way, I'm ranking these LTMs based on how fun they were, and I'm also taking into consideration how classic the LTM was for its time. Just a heads up, I'll be grouping a few of the similar LTMs together in the rankings. At 73, we have Big Battle, which is essentially 0 build 40 versus 40. The LTM was created in Creative Royale, and I have this at the bottom of the list because the LTM was bugged and wouldn't load full lobbies in. Epic removed it early as well, so not many people even got to play this. At 72, we have Rally Royale, and the implication was that you would be racing, but this wasn't the LTM at all. You had to collect tickets and then cross the finish line. The tickets came out of supply drops, and you didn't start in a car and didn't actually need cars in order to win, so it was a little bit more difficult as the supply drops were pretty spread out on the entire map. The LTM was just kind of messy. There wasn't really any cohesion going on here. And at 71, we have Slide, and this was part of the 14 days of Fortnite. You had infinite grapplers, but there were ice blocks on your feet the entire time, causing you to be constantly sliding while fighting, which just wasn't fun. It was more nauseating than anything. At 70, we have Going Green, the St. Patrick's Day LTM. You could only find green weapons when looting chests or the floor loot. The only exception was if you found a buried treasure, which provided rare items, and that wasn't even intentional. It was just like playing a worse version of Battle Royale. At 69, we have Score Royale, and the goal was to have the most points at the end of the game, and the points were earned by opening chests, ammo boxes, supply drops, collecting coins, and eliminating players. You didn't even need to fight in order to win. You could just land at a big POI and loot the entire game. It might be more fun for casual players, but this wasn't something I enjoyed. At 68, we have Sword Fight, epic and legendary items only. The Infinity Blade was also obtainable in this mode, and multiple were available per match, but it was nerfed. And it was called Sword Fight, but most people just used the normal epic and legendary weapons because of how hard it was to kill people with swords in this LTM. It might have ranked higher if there weren't normal guns, but calling it a sword fight and then everybody's just using guns anyways was kind of a miss. At 67, we have Ice Storm. This LTM dropped in Season 7, and the only difference between this mode and normal BR at the time was that they added zombies and foggy weather. It was essentially a Fort Nightmares event in the snow, and nobody really likes the fog or the zombies, so it was just kind of annoying to play. At 66, we have Ship It Express, similar to Throwdown, except this was also 0 build, no building, but you did have Overshield. It was only throwable items like clingers that you could use to kill other players, and when the LTM was first released, there was an issue that caused combat caches to still spawn and drop normal weapons, which absolutely ruined the LTM, and Epic quickly tried to patch it. This LTM being 0 build though took the fun out of skybasing and also made it a lot harder to protect yourself from the throwables. At 65, we have Throwdown/Catch, and it was a throwable, consumable items only LTM. You could eat 1 single shield mushroom, so you'd have 5 shields and could survive at least 1 clinger, but most of the time people won by just skybasing. Skybasing in this mode was fun, but the actual LTM itself just wasn't that fun. They later added in Catch, which was the same LTM, but they added in shields like minis and slurps, so you could actually survive more than 1 explosion, which did make the LTM a little bit better, but overall not that great. At 64, we have Wild West. This was inspired by weapons from frontier times like the hunting rifle, pump shotgun, and 6-shooter revolver, and dynamite. Most weapons in this game mode had a super slow fire rate, so the play was to prioritize weapons that shot faster. The LTM was alright, just not the best loot pool, and the fact that some guns were just so much better made it feel unbalanced in a bad way. At 63, we have Tilted Taxi. You literally drove a taxi around in this mode and picked up passengers to bring to their destination. You gained stars for each drop-off you made, but combat was still enabled during this, so people could kill you. To win this game mode, you had to be the first to collect the target number of driver rating stars. I can give them respect for the unique concept, but this LTM just wasn't it. At 62, we actually have a recent one. This is called Training Grounds. It actually replaced Team Rumble. It's actually team deathmatch with up to 8-player squads. Each match starts with hero weapons from this season. The POIs from chapter 6 rotate in this mode. BR quests can be completed in this mode, and this game mode is 0 build. Team Rumble was such a classic LTM that replacing it with Training Grounds feels a little disrespectful, especially considering that the player count on this mode is lower than Team Rumble. At 61, we have Splashdown, infinite recharging water balloons, chest drop, chiller grenades, bush, smoke bombs, and boogie bombs. Everyone had 30 max HP and infinite respawns. The first player or team to reach the goal of 60 eliminations won. It was a fun LTM with friends, but that's about it. At 60, we have Party Royale, intended to be just a social game mode, no building, no fighting, just vibes, changing booths, and some mini games. Community loves to make sus clips from this LTM, and it's a fun idea for casual players, but you really never know what you're walking into when you queue into Party Royale. 59, we have Storm Chasers Surfing. You start the game on a surfboard and you use impulse grenades to try to knock other players back into the storm. You could also pickaxe them as well. Impulse grenades would just spawn in your inventory throughout the match, and the objective was to race around and avoid the storm and be the last player standing. It was a fun LTM in theory, but it ended up being kind of mid. At 58, we have The Spy Within, and this was Fortnite's first version of imposters. There were 10 players working together to determine who the 2 spies were in the match. The 2 spies were responsible for eliminating other players without getting caught, and the agent not only had to find the spies, but complete tasks around the map, similar to Among Us. No one was able to speak to each other unless a meeting was called, and during the meeting, they could vote players out that they thought were the spy. Whoever got voted out was obviously eliminated, and the problem was that this LTM was just scuffed. It wasn't as good and it wasn't as polished as imposters, so it didn't really catch on. At 57, we have Ground Game. Limited amount of ammo and materials, only 30 wood, 20 brick, and 20 metal. The intention was to use natural cover on the map and not rely heavily on builds, while also focusing on aim by limiting the amount of ammo players could hold. It was almost a version of 0 build with how few materials you actually had, and the way these games ended up playing out wasn't really that fun. At 56, we have Search and Destroy, 2 teams of 6 players each. The attackers are attempting to plant a bomb at a specific bomb site, and the defenders are trying to stop them. Attackers can win by successfully planting and activating the bomb, and defenders can win by defusing the bomb or eliminating the entire enemy team. This LTM was low-key forgettable, especially because we didn't have a lot of the movement options that we have right now. It was basically like ballistics, but without any of the polish. At 55, we have the floor restores, and all healing items were disabled. No fish, no consumables. You only gain health and shield over time by being on the ground. It's an interesting concept, but it doesn't really add much fun to the gameplay. At 54, we have Heavy Metal, originally only having heavy weapons like the heavy assault rifle, heavy sniper rifle, and the heavy shotgun. And metal and brick gave you more materials than usual. But in season 9, the LTM was changed and you started getting weapons like the drum shotgun and pistols. And honestly, I'd rather just queue up into a regular match of BR. At 53, we have Sneaky Silencers, the 3rd LTM that we ever had. There were only 2 weapons, Suppressed SMG and Suppressed Pistol. And it was later updated and replaced by Fog of War. And I'm ranking Sneaky Silencers much lower than Fog of War because of the lack of weapon choices compared to the Fog of War LTM. At 52, we have Headshot Only. Shotguns were removed from this mode and only headshots counted as damage. Hitting someone in the body did 0 damage, so it was all about aiming for the head. Headshot only helped people improve their aim and get more headshots, but not a lot of people were queuing into this mode. At 51, we have teams of 12, teams of 33, and teams of 20. All of these LTMs were similar, just different team sizes. 8 teams of 12 players fought until the last team standing. Teams of 33, which is similar to 50 versus 50, but it's just 3 teams this time. And then we had teams of 20, which was 5 teams of 20 players. Chests, ammo, and supply drops had increased chances of dropping. And in each LTM, the teams came out in their own separate buses, making for some unique shaped drops. These LTMs weren't bad, but they were extremely chaotic and not as satisfying as 50 versus 50. And at 50, we have Knockout Shuffle. 16 teams of 4 fighting in a tournament format. Each round, a team faces another in a certain location. The goal is to last 3 minutes and get the most eliminations within those 3 minutes. Each team member and team had the exact same loadout, and it was fun for a couple of games, but the Marvel version of this LTM actually improved it quite a bit. At number 49, we have Steady Storm. There were no safe zones to avoid the zone. The zone was constantly closing and you had to watch the map closely to make sure you were at the center of the circle. And the storm did a ton of damage if it hit you. It was a 10 tick from the very beginning of the match. The games were very quick in this LTM. They definitely tried something unique, but I played it a couple of times, got the vibe of it very quickly, and they never really brought this back, so it probably didn't do too well. At 48, we have Disco Domination. This LTM was the most Fortnite LTM you could ever hope for. It was 50 versus 50 with multiple dance floors around the map. You had to clear out the enemies on the dance floor and then emote until the disco ball was raised. And every time you did that, you would capture the dance floor and get a bunch of points. And the team that filled their dance meter the most was the winner at the end of it all. The community did actually end up enjoying this LTM because it was very casual and kind of fun. At 47, we have Operation Knockout, Operation Infiltration, Operation Payload, Operation Drop Zone. All these LTMs are pretty much the same thing. They were all part of the Spy LTM, and basically Operation Knockout, Infiltration, and Payload and Drop Zone. They had a unique feature of tech to increase your power level, and tech consisted of weapons, perks, and items that were available to choose every time you leveled up. Operation Knockout was a tournament-style LTM, 16 rounds that took place in different locations, and the top 2 teams fought it out for the victory. Operation Infiltration was 2 teams, defenders and attackers. Defenders had 2 minutes while attackers had to try to, basically plant a bomb in the safe zone. Operation Payload was an escort LTM where you're either escorting the payload or trying to stop the team that was doing that. And this was one of the only LTMs in this group where an actual draw could happen. And finally, Operation Drop Zone. This was the first Spy LTM added, and it worked similar to Team Rumble. First team who got 150 points in this LTM would win. And they were unique with the added tech feature, which made it a little bit more enjoyable since you got to choose between different upgrades. 46, we have Tank Battle. I remember when this came out, and I remember having a good time playing it. So players would gain 1 shield a second, and they would steal shields every time they damaged other players. There were no heals on the map, so that was the only way you could heal up, is either through siphon or waiting for your health to go up. The damage of guns was reduced by 25%, including pickaxes, and at max, you could have 500 health and 500 shield, giving you 1,000 effective HP. So it was basically battle of the tanks. Every player was very tanky, and you had to hit your shots. It was very slow-paced combat, but it was actually unique, and I had a good time playing it. At 45, we have Beach Assault. So this LTM didn't really feel like Fortnite, and that's not a bad thing. It was unique for the game, and I can respect it. One team defended the beach while the other team tried to invade it. Everyone got a drum gun, a pump shotgun, and an infantry rifle. It was kind of like a World War simulator, to be honest with you. Chests could give you other things like LMGs and hunting rifles, and there was no building, so it was kind of like a 0 build mode. The matches lasted about 6 minutes, and everyone got to play both sides. Honestly, I don't even remember playing this, so yeah, I can't really comment too much about it. At 44, we have Bare Bones. Parts of the HUD were actually disabled. It's funny because we used to do this as a challenge, like the map, compass, storm timer. It was interesting, and it was kind of like a hardcore mode. Your teammates also didn't have arrows, so it was hard to tell who was actually on your team and who wasn't. And some players were using the backtracker backbling because it gave you an advantage in this LTM because you could actually see where the zone was and where you are in relevance to the zone, which kind of defeated the purpose of the LTM, but it was an interesting concept, so not too bad. At 43, we have Pickaxe Frenzy. So this started as a Lachlan's Pickaxe Frenzy tournament, and then it was later added as an LTM because people really liked it. 10 of each materials, only pickaxes, rusty cans, and that was the only way you could damage players. There was also impulses, so you could knock players into storm or make them take fall damage. And there was siphon on eliminating players, which was nice. It rewarded players who were being aggressive. You could also heal up by emoting. So everyone was using full tilt while playing this LTM because you can kind of like run and heal up while doing an emote. It was actually a very fun LTM, and it was one of the few melee LTMs that Epic actually got right. So this one is pretty solid. At 42, we have Sniper Shootout. Snipers only. Down but not out was disabled in this LTM. So even if you're on a team, you were instantly eliminated. And when you shot, your location was revealed to everyone. Only the suppressed sniper rifle would keep your location hidden. Now, this LTM may have ranked higher if your location didn't get revealed when sniping because it kind of rewarded players for camping. At 41, we have Fog of War. This was low-key pretty fun. Basically, it was like based off of sneaky silencers. You had 2 additional guns, though, because you had the sniper suppressed and the suppressed AR. Yeah, it was a step up from sneaky silencers because it just had a little bit more variety. At 40, we have Strategic Structures, and these next LTMs do feel like a cautious introduction to 0 build mode because the max amount of materials you could have in this mode was very, very limited, and you had to be very careful when overbuilding. So you had 1,000 wood, 500 brick, 100 metal. And brick and metal had more health, so it took a lot longer to destroy them. And the idea here was that, originally Fortnite was supposed to be like a base building game. So they decided to kind of make this LTM as a way for people to actually kind of like build bases and fortresses using the brick and metal. And the wood was really meant to be used for like quick builds. Not that memorable. I don't even remember playing this, to be honest with you, but yeah, it was interesting. At 39, we have used with care. So the mats were even more limited in this mode. You only could use 200 wood, 150 brick, and 100 metal, and you could not gain any more throughout the entire match, except if you eliminated other players. So you had to be extremely careful when building. This is them really trying to see if they can kind of tap into what Fortnite was supposed to be in their head. But of course, that is not what ended up happening. At 38, we have Builder's Paradise. So this is similar to a regular Battle Royale game, except you could edit everyone's builds. Farming rates were also increased and builds had higher health as well. So it was a very, very chaotic mode because, I mean, being able to just edit anybody who was boxed up was a little bit crazy, but very aggressive players definitely shine in this mode. At 37, we have Shockwave. So this LTM was very similar to Smash Bros. The teams fought to win 3 rounds, and each round the team would receive a random loadout. So the guns all had a knockback effect, and the objective was to knock players into the zone. The more damage you took, the more the knockback effect would get increased, similar if you've ever played Smash Bros. This was a very, very unique LTM. I remember playing this and I had a ton of fun as well. At 36, we have Soaring Solos. So this is almost exactly like normal Battle Royale, except the difference was you got glider redeploy. There was fall damage, even though you got glider redeploy, so you had to make sure that you actually used your glider. And back then, glider redeploy was requested so much by the community that this was a favorite LTM for quite a few years. And of course, Fortnite even had a season and a half where glider redeploy was always on. I personally did not like that. At 35, we have Unvaulted. This first appeared in Season 7, and the loot pool mostly consisted of items that were vaulted from previous seasons. When it came back in Chapter 3, Season 1, the Machine SMG was unvaulted before it even released to Battle Royale. I remember getting my hands on that. So it was a fun way to play with guns that you kind of missed from previous seasons, but this doesn't really work that much anymore because now we have modes like Reload where they have unvaulted weapons in there all the time. At 34, we have Close Encounters. This is shotguns only. Players also spawned with a jetpack automatically equipped, and there was no building. All the fights were up close and personal, and all came down to shotgun damage. It's definitely a classic LTM. At 33, we have Team Rumble, which only recently got shut down and replaced by a new mode. So this is a Fortnite classic. Everyone remembers playing Team Rumble at some point in their Fortnite career. 16 versus 16 team deathmatch. Players were able to respawn and keep their weapons. Glider redeploy was always on. The storm circle would start closing immediately onto a smaller area where the deathmatch would happen. The first team to reach a certain number of eliminations would win the game. Pretty straightforward and a good way to warm up. At 32, we have Team Rumble Lava. So this one's a bit higher than Team Rumble only because it combined 2 classic LTMs, Team Rumble and Floor's Lava. It still had the same mechanics as Team Rumble, but lava rose throughout the entire match, and overall it was a solid game mode. At 31, we have Bodyguard. This one was interesting for Fortnite. Each squad had a VIP, and the VIPs were marked on the map, and they were not able to pick up weapons. They did spawn with a legendary pistol and a rechargeable revive grenade, the only time this was ever used in Fortnite. The rest of the squad was considered the bodyguards, and they had to protect their VIP because if the VIP got eliminated, then the whole squad was wiped. At 30, we have Rags to Riches. Chests and floor loot will only give common weapons, and the only way to get better weapons is by eliminating players, and then your weapon would randomly upgrade. A random weapon in your inventory would. You could go all the way up to legendary. So I actually really like this mode because it rewarded playing aggressive, it rewarded good players, but of course it made it very, very sweaty because a bad player who just dropped in and is avoiding combat is stuck with common weapons, while a good player who's racked up a few eliminations might already have a legendary shotgun and a legendary scar. At 29, we have Comeback. This is before Reload, but it was kind of a precursor to it. So you start out with a common pistol, and the difference between this and Rags to Riches is that you can upgrade your weapon to the next tier by dying and respawning. So once you reach legendary, you had no more respawns left and would be permanently eliminated if you died again. This mode also had Siphon when killing other players, making it very, very fun. At 28, we have Impossible Escape. So there were 2 versions, a PvE version and a PvP version, and the objective was to work together to rebuild the chopper. The parts were scattered all over the map, and you would either fight AI or other real players to get those parts, and then once you rebuilt the chopper, you would fly over, get it refueled, and you would complete and win the game. As an LTM, this was extremely immersive, and it was a very unique LTM, and I remember having a ton of fun, especially in the PvP mode, eliminating other players and even tricking my own teammates. It was very devious, but they never really expanded on this, and I think they should. At number 27, we have Fortnite Combine. So real OGs know there was so much going on here where you could test your aiming skills, muscle memory to get the fastest time possible in the aim course. And it was a global leaderboard. Everyone was trying to get the fastest time. And there was a timer that would let you know how fast you completed each course. I remember every single streamer and pro player grinding this to try to get the top score in the Combine. At 26, we have Marvel Takeover, Marvel Standoff, and Marvel Knockout. We're going to bunch all these Marvel LTMs together. They're all extremely good. So all three of these LTMs use the Marvel superpowers. Marvel Takeover had teams of 8. They would stand on location to gather points while the storm constantly moved. And to win, you had to be the first team to 100% your progress from capturing the points. Instead, in Marvel Standoff, it was 2 teams of 15 and you had 3 lives. Once your lives ran out, you were fully eliminated, and the first team to eliminate the other won. And then in Marvel Knockout, it was similar to the tournament style of Knockout Shuffle, and you won by winning every single bracket. It was a very cool LTM and actually got very competitive. At 25, we have Gunfight. 2v2 on a unique map made specifically for this LTM. Each round, all players were given the same loadout, and the first duo to win 4 rounds won the match. This was probably based off of the Call of Duty Warzone Gulag because it had very, very similar vibes. At 24, we have Power Up. The more shields you drank, the higher your max shields would be. So you basically wanted to drink shields as you were getting them so you could become tankier and healthier. This mode also had respawn, and outside of that, played like a normal BR game. Similar to Reload, but you were way stronger and took longer to kill. At 23, we have Loadout Swap. So as the name suggests, you start with a predetermined loadout, and throughout the game, your loadout would swap, where you wouldn't just get new weapons, but a new number of materials as well. The person with the highest eliminations at the end was the winner, and nowadays we see challenges of this on YouTube all the time, but it's pretty much the same concept in LTM mode. At 22, we have Air Royale. All players fought in an X4 Stormwing, and the mission was to destroy the other planes. If you land on the ground, you were eliminated, and there was also no battle bus in this game. You just spawned in on your plane. Each plane had 3 lives before you were permanently eliminated, and the last plane standing won. This was actually very fun. It was very unique to have like an air battle. And I remember a lot of people playing this when it first came out. Planes were obviously a lot more fun and balanced because everyone was in one. And this actually got very intense. At 21, we have One Shot. Everyone had 50 HP and low gravity was enabled, and it was snipers only. There were no shields or consumables, so 1 shot, 1 kill is all it took. And a lot of people really, really love this mode, especially if they were into sniping and trick shotting. And now for our top 20. At 20, we have Wick's Bounty, Mando's Bounty, and just Bounty. So Epic really cooked on these Bounty LTMs. I'm grouping them all together. The difference was there was John Wick references in the John Wick one, Mando references, and then of course the regular bounty mode. Players spawned in with 3 lives and with a rare combat shotgun and a tactical AR. You have to kill other players to get gold coins, and the player who had the most coins was marked on the map so you could hunt them down and kill them for their coins. And you basically won the match by reaching a certain coin goal. At 19, we have Blitz Showdown, and this is one of the first ever tournament LTMs or tournaments we've ever seen in Fortnite. First place got 20,000 V-Bucks, second through fifth got 13,500 V-Bucks, sixth through 100th got 7,500 V-Bucks. You had to play 25 games of Blitz Showdown to be eligible for the prize, and the score was based off of a placement and eliminations, but winning a game gave 100 points, while eliminations were only worth 3 points, so it was very, very placement focused. The zone also moved faster to help speed up the games, but they still weren't as quick as the Blitz mode that we have now. At number 18, we have Mr. Beast Extreme Survival Challenge. So Mr. Beast and Fortnite created an LTM where the winner actually got $1 million. They had to get the highest score on this Mr. Beast LTM, where basically you have to survive, collect coins, and complete the mini games in order to earn your score. Once the LTM was over, the player with the highest score out of everyone won the prize of $1 million. This is actually one of the best creative maps I've ever played, and it was a ton of fun. At 17, we have Team Terror. This is a classic Fortnitemares LTM, 32 versus 32. It played similar to 50 versus 50, but there were cube monster spawns in this mode. There was the golden monster that dropped legendary items. Mats, ammo, and floor loot was all increased. And first team to fully eliminate the other team won the game. At 16, we have Horde Rush. So this LTM normally comes out during Fortnitemares, and it has changed several times, but pretty much is the same concept every single year. Players work together to eliminate the sideways monsters and complete 3 encounters against them. You won by eliminating the boss in the final encounter, caretaker, and you could really maximize your points by being very efficient and eliminating as many monsters and cube structures as possible. At 15, we have Tempest of the Storm King. So the objective was actually to fight the Storm King, and this fight was actually extremely epic. The storm moved quickly to push you towards the Isle of the Storm, where the Storm King was, and you'd have to fight him by destroying all of his weak spots. After destroying the weak spots, you shot him in his horns until he was eliminated, and once you eliminated him, you got the Storm Sail Umbrella. At 14, we have Arsenal. This one created a unique challenge with how you played, because you started out with a mythic item in solos and your weapon downgraded as you gained eliminations until you got to a point where you had to kill players with your pickaxe. And you won by having the most amount of eliminations, and it felt very good to win. It was a very rewarding LTM. At 13, we have 50 versus 50, Soaring 50s, and Solid Gold 50 versus 50. A very, very popular LTM, and it was the first ever LTM. 2 teams of 50 players, and originally it did not have separate battle buses when you spawned in, but eventually they did that. 10 minutes to loot before the storm closes, and lots of supply drops throughout the mode. Each team battles it out to get a lot of eliminations, and whichever team eliminated the other team first won it all. At 12, we have Imposters. Imposters was the Fortnite version of Among Us. The concept was similar to Spies Within, but everything was a lot more polished with this LTM. Agents completed tasks like calibrating chests and llamas, preparing the battle bus, and delivering reports about the storm. And of course, the imposters had to eliminate people before getting voted out. And there was a meeting that could be called when a body was found, and there was also a way just to call in a meeting. It was basically just Among Us, but in Fortnite. And they did a good job with it, but then eventually they removed this mode for some reason. At 11, we have Siphon, the second LTM ever added to Fortnite. There were no consumables on this LTM. The only way to get heals is by eliminating other players. There was an accidental bug in this LTM where you could find some heals in the vending machines, but that wasn't intended. Other than that, the loot pool was the same as VR, and you won by being the last player standing, but Siphon always feels extremely rewarding. So this LTM was fun, and it ranks high on my list. At number 10, we have Endgame. This LTM had you feeling like you were in an actual Marvel movie. Endgame was Avengers versus Thanos and his army. You wanted to keep Thanos from collecting all 6 Infinity Stones. The Avengers respawned until the Infinity Stones were all collected. You had to kill his army 150 times to disable their respawn and then defeat Thanos himself to win as the Avenger. And Thanos and his army would have to collect all 6 Infinity Stones and then defeat the remaining Avengers to win the mode. It was super intense and very, very fun to play, especially with all the different mythics and power-ups. At number 9, we have High Explosives and Fly Explosive. This is another classic LTM. Only explosive weapons like rocket launchers, grenade launchers, quad launchers, boom bows, grenades, dynamites, clingers, C4, you name it. You could have a ton of rockets, and the actual ammo cap was up to 120. Glider redeploy was also enabled for fast movement, and the amount of memes and potential with this LTM was extremely high. At number 8, we have Solid Gold. The normal battle royale rules, except every single weapon was legendary, and every chest and ammo box was the rare version of those chests and ammo box. Very, very solid LTM. Everyone likes playing with legendary weapons, so this one ranks extremely high. At number 7, we have the classic Playground and Battle Lab. Playground was the first LTM to become a core game mode. The maximum number of players was 16. You would drop into a private island where there was no storm and you had infinite respawns. It even had friendly fire so you could kill your friends, and Playground was eventually removed and replaced with Battle Lab. But Playground really changed the way Fortnite was played. It had such a huge impact because it was the first time players could actually practice their building and editing and fighting skills in a controlled environment, because it came out before creative was a thing. At number 6, we have Food Fight and Food Fight Deep Fried. One of the community favorite LTMs. Food Fight is Der Burger versus Pizza Pit. You were not able to pick which side you were on. You just got randomly assigned. The 2 teams were on different sides of the map with a huge barrier in the middle. You started building a fort around the barrier, and eventually the barrier would drop and players would start fighting. Players would respawn and keep their inventory when they died, and you won by destroying the enemy team's mascot, which is usually hidden behind their base. Once the mascot was eliminated, respawns were disabled, and you had to eliminate the remaining enemy players to fully win the game. A lot of people love this. Even I did. It was casual, but a ton of fun. So now time for our top 5. Number 5, Getaway. You actually got some cosmetics from this LTM if you played it. 4 safes are scattered around the map, and each one contains a large jewel. You wanted to grab one of these jewels and then take it to one of the escape vans around the map before another player did the same thing. There was a limited amount of escape vans, so not everybody was escaping. You had to fight for your right to escape. This was actually extremely intense, especially when there was no bots and everyone was trying to win. It was so much fun and a very, very unique game mode, which Fortnite tried to bring back recently, but they also released like a ranked mode for it for some reason, and no one was playing that. But the original one was a top 5 for sure. At number 4, we have Zone Wars. So you would start out with 500 of each material in a random loadout, and it was intended to resemble an end game in Battle Royale. 15 players with a moving zone and multiple rounds. It became a popular concept within creative and UEFN, even though it's no longer its own LTM. People have recreated Zone Wars maps all the time. So this will be a forever classic, but not as much of a classic as number 3, Late Game Arena / Bugha's Late Game Arena. 60-player lobbies where the match began in the 4th zone, simulating late games in an actual tournament environment. It had a ranked system that awarded hype points like Arena. You start out with 500 mats, random loadout, and Siphon was also enabled. There was also Bugha's Late Game Arena that was designed to put players in the shoes of Bugha from the 2019 World Cup. This was one of the best ways to practice and get better at Fortnite. And now for number 2, the floor is lava. This is one of the best epic LTMs ever. Normal BR gameplay, except lava rises 5 minutes into the match, and you had 5 minutes to loot and get ready for the lava to start sneaking up. Lava did 20 damage if you touched it, but it was possible to build on top of the lava to save yourself, of course. You also gained a small amount of materials throughout the entire match to keep yourself above the lava. And Epic brought this LTM back in Chapter 5 with Midas, and the lava was actually molten gold. So much fun on this mode. One of the best LTMs ever, but not the best LTM, because for me, the best LTM Fortnite has ever put out, and it's not even close, is the Infinity Gauntlet LTM. Thanos came to the game, and guys, this was back in Chapter 1, Season 4. This is one of our first collaborations ever, and it's with Marvel. Absolutely insane. The Infinity Gauntlet would come crashing down early in the game, and whoever picked it up turned into Thanos and would pretty much turn into a demigod, walking around eliminating every single player in the game. Now, it was possible to defeat Thanos. Really good players knew how to do that, but you actually felt like a true final boss, and there was so much fun where players were teaming up against Thanos and players were running for their lives. Absolutely legendary moment, and the fact that it happened so early in Fortnite's entire lifespan is crazy to think about. Now, this was just my list. Some of you might agree, some of you might disagree, but if you guys enjoyed this content, be sure to like and subscribe.